Hello, so today we are going to talk about The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. I was very impressed with this book. The subtitle kind of describes pretty succinctly what the book's about, why good people are divided by politics and religion. And so what the book aims to do is sort of describe how people kind of process information ethically. And one of the first things he goes into is describing how we don't really rationalize our way to deciding good ethics. A lot of it is just gut instinct. And so what we often do is we do what we think is right just based on our gut. And the part that is rationalizing is the part that explains it to ourselves or tells our stories. So the rational part is doing the explaining or backwards rationalizing what we intuitively feel like we should do. And one of the things I really like about Jonathan Haidt is that he let's get that out of there. He uses metaphors to really capture ideas in a good way. And one of the metaphors he uses, I think he's used it in all of his books now, is the elephant and the rider metaphor, which is that our intuition let's use intuition is like an elephant, and our cognition and our like higher order thinking is the rider. And the elephant's a lot more powerful than the rider and basically gets to decide how things go down. But the rider can direct the elephant to some extent. And overall, it's a symbiotic relationship because in terms of ethics, being able to justify yourself is actually really important. But that's exactly what the thinking portion is really doing, is more justifying than actually procedurally trying to decide ethics. Another model or metaphor he uses, a lot of sort of the juxtaposing he does is comparing conservatives and liberals. And one of the ways he has like another metaphor, which I think is really powerful, is we have moral taste receptors. Okay, and we have different taste receptor senses. And I think it's 5. So we have fairness, which this is a bit that's pretty interesting as well. Liberals process fairness a little bit different than conservatives do in general. Conservatives evaluate fairness more in terms of proportionality. So, for example, if you commit a bad crime, it's fair for you to get a bad sentence. Or if you commit like a smaller crime, smaller sentence. If you do really hard work, you should get paid more. If you don't do hard work, you should get paid less. So the idea is that your results should be proportionate to what you're doing, both in terms of good and bad. For fairness, for liberals, it's more processed on an axis of equality or equity, which is that everyone has enough. And this, there's another, I think it's 6 taste things. Another one is care harm. So let's get through all of them. So care harm is kind of self-explanatory. Don't harm others. Provide care for people who are in bad times. Another one is loyalty and betrayal. So this is like an interesting phenomena where deserters are often thought of as worse than enemy forces in war. There's some type of study that Haidt mentioned in there regarding that. I can't remember the details. Another one is authority and subversion. Should authority be listened to, or is it regarded as something that you shouldn't trust? Another is sanctity degradation. So there's one thought experiment he uses to highlight sanctity degradation that's a little provocative, I think, for the average person, which he talks about. This isn't even the most provocative, but family has a dog. Dog dies. And so the family decides to eat the dog. So they eat the dog. Okay. Most people want to knee-jerk say that this is morally wrong. And it's kind of hard if you're using like a Western liberal notion of morality to explain why it's wrong, because most of that is based off of, I think it's John Stuart Mill's harm principle, which is you're free to do anything you want as long as it doesn't hurt other people. And the second it hurts other people or impinges on their freedoms, you can't do it anymore. And so the dog one is a good example because you're not really hurting anyone by eating the dog, the family dog, Old Yeller. But most people are inclined to think that it's wrong. And coming back to the taste bud thing, most people think it's wrong because it violates the sanctity degradation sort of the taste receptor, right? We aren't supposed to eat our pets or our family members, for example. You can use a more extreme example would be, Grandpa Bill died and we ate him. And so it doesn't harm it. Doesn't harm anyone, but it's violating the sanctity principle. And the final taste bud is liberty and oppression. And one of the things that I really like about Haidt is because he synthesizes from multiple sorts of disciplines and ways of thinking, and as well as he's doing research on his own on this ethics thing in psychology. A lot of the other research before Haidt was kind of evaluating morality through this lens that ignored the taste receptors of authority, subversion, loyalty, betrayal, and sanctity degradation quite a bit. Or not ignored, but they weren't in there. And it was mainly just caring about freedom, liberty and oppression, and fairness. Primarily fairness, I think, was the biggest area of concern. And so it's leaving out these different textured ways of thinking. And in some areas of the world, sanctity and degradation are really important. And I think the example he uses is in India, you're not supposed to eat with a certain hand or shake with a certain hand. Just these, or if you eat fish, you can't have someone, it makes you unclean. I can't remember. There's just these examples that seem really strange, but it's considered taboo to do it. And this is kind of looked down on in the Western tradition, this type of moralizing. But Haidt found that there's some positive benefits to having a moral structure that relies on sanctity rather than just harm and freedom and that sort of thing. Another distinction regarding his model of the taste receptor things was he argues that conservatives, basically, they just use all the receptors. But liberals are primarily using fairness, care harm, and liberty and oppression, and aren't really using the other ones. Another example that he gives, although he doesn't talk about it too much, is libertarians. They basically only care about fairness and liberty and oppression, just those two matrices, and then they just don't care about the rest, which is kind of it was very interesting to read that, because that's kind of where I am in a lot of ways, is also with I lean liberal, but then I like proportionate fairness in terms of evaluating fairness, proportionality, which is more of a conservative way of evaluating fairness. And so Haidt kind of gives tools for thinking through that, but also, and I think this is the most important part, tools for understanding where the other side can be coming from on a lot of these things. Increasingly, I think polarization is a problem, and so I'm always kind of on the lookout for books, I think, that will be effective at I can't think of the words I want to use. I want to say it inoculating ones against rabid tribalism or something, but that's not the right word. I'm always on the lookout for books that can give someone a more nuanced and textured way of evaluating information, such that it makes them more resistant to tribalism. And I think this is one of these books. I also think he has another book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which I would also, if I were to make a list of books to combat tribalism, I think those two would both be on it. I was very impressed with this book overall. I think Haidt, his first book was like kind of medium for me, but his other two books have been extremely good. So I would highly recommend this to anyone interested in politics or tribalism, or just who are just sometimes very confused why people do things, and they like to understand why. As opposed to just demonizing the out group. The book also covers like tribalism and disgust and some other things that are like relevant to the discussion, but I won't go into them here. Let's get into the ratings. For utility, I gave it a 7. I think, for the most part, if you live in the United States or like a Western country, basically a country where you would be watching this video to begin with, you have to interact with people who you disagree with, and being able to see where they're coming from and act civilly with them and be more understanding, even if you disagree, and also just be able to articulate and structure your perspective in a way that they might be more receptive to. Being able to do all of that, I think, is incredibly useful. That said, like, this book doesn't have any sort of prescriptions or, like, this is how you do this is how you do that. It's an information book. So I gave it a 7, which is pretty solid. It's pretty high for information. For novelty, I gave it a 7.5. I think Haidt outlines ways of looking at things that are, if you've never been exposed to them, he gives you ways of looking at things that I think are very useful, which is the rider and the elephant metaphor and the moral tastes metaphor. And also, if you've never been exposed to or explained or had like the moral tastes kind of perspective explained to you, I think it actually goes a really long way towards giving a nice foundational understanding of where the other side may be coming from if you're only operating on either conservative or like liberal types of ways of thinking. I also think that this notion that we often just do what we want to do and then we come up with an explanation of it after, and this is kind of how he kicks off the book. I think that if you've never been exposed to any of the literature on that is tremendously useful for both better understanding yourself and figuring out how to live more consistently with your own values, but also for understanding other people and perhaps like being a little bit more temperate in terms of when people do that, you don't get as mad because you kind of have the blinders on yourself when you're doing it. You just think you're giving reasons, but it's a little more. You didn't have the reasons before you were asked to explain yourself, is often the case. And the reason why is they didn't exist. So they're post hoc constructions. For entertainment, I gave it a 5. It's like medium. It's entertaining to the extent that it's interesting, but there's like no narrative structure. His style it's okay. I gave it a 6. He's clear. He's easy to follow. Some interesting stuff. It's nothing like crazy though. Readability, I gave it a 7.5. I like the way he structures the book. He makes ideas really accessible, especially with like the metaphors he uses, the overarching metaphors, and he brings it back to ideas he's used before. It's just very, even though it's somewhat like the subject matter is somewhat academic and technical, not overly technical, he does a good job of putting it out there. And for interest, I gave it an 8.5. I think that this book was very interesting. Some of the ideas are pretty novel, and then it makes you. Morality is just something that everyone thinks about or uses, and so giving sort of frameworks through which to process that, I think, is actually it's very appealing to read, and I think it's also quite useful, obviously, because I gave it a 7. And so I would give it an 8.5 for interest, for an overall score of 6.92, which I think is the highest on the year. And it is December 2nd as I record this. Probably going to upload it later. But in general, I would recommend this book. I think I already gave reasons why to recommend it. Very strong book. It's a bit on the thick side, maybe 400 pages, but it's very readable for what it's talking about. And I think that's about it. Have a good one.